All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Civil Rhetoric. We're sitting here with another guest that we've had back for a second time. This is going to be Zaira. Zaira is actually one of the more fun discussions I've ever had. Hard to believe she's as young as she is, very wise beyond her years. And I mean, she does have on a really cool t shirt right now, I must admit.
So, like I said in the last episode I was on, we both like horror, and so I'm wearing the future of horror's female. So, have to, represent.
We got to raise the roof like old people.
You should have. Do you have your button where it's like the cheering?
Oh, yeah. Oh, let's see. I think it's this one. Oh, wait. There we go. Oh, man, it's funny, I still gotta get used to the soundboard. It's a Rodecaster Pro, and it's, like, a really short plug for them. Really good with your audio, because what I typically do is I use Recast here. I'll record the actual sessions, and I edit this file. However, the Rodecaster allows you to record, complete audio only. You can adjust the voices, you can drop people in, add them out. Also, if you ever do a live setting, you can take this with you and literally record from a laptop at, like, a Starbucks. So it's actually a
Okay.
pretty cool. Yeah, it's really cool, multiple mic settings it accepts. Has a soundboard that, like, I'm still getting comfortable with, but it's, like,
Yeah.
76, and you can load in your own sound, so really big up for it. Guitar Center has them usually used, maybe 400 bucks at most.
Okay.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
cool, really
Yeah, I
cool.
use the Scarlet by Focusrite, so kind of looks like this red box, and definitely not as cool because I don't have the soundboard, but it helps me adjust the mics and everything and all that. So, but I'll check that out too.
Definitely, and it was funny, I was looking, the Scarlett did pop up. Actually, a really good system. The only reason I went with this system here is I kinda was like, "Okay, I'm going to need to commit to this thing, I'm gonna really wanna put this into it," and for me, money is what typically makes me commit, so I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna spend some money on this
Yeah.
thing," like, that's when, like, I redid the studio. I was like, "I'm really gonna give it a go." So here we are.
Yes.
One thing I did wanna do is, I don't want to necessarily pick up completely from where we left off last time because that was a rather heavy subject. And today we're going to get on the lighter side of things and see the fun side of Zaira. So, what I was thinking we do is we briefly recap the story. But instead of going super deep into the low points of it, I'd like to kind of focus on, your survivor story side of
Mhm.
it versus the victim side of things
Mhm.
and kind of seeing how you've grown now. Someone who is amazing, someone who is strong, someone who's really cool and has a really cool t-shirt, like I mentioned before. So, Zaira, if you wouldn't mind, take it away.
Right. So again, it's a little bit heavy topic, so trigger warning for people listening. But if you listen to my previous episode with Larry, it was discussing about sexual assault and my experiences. I went through two experiences, a few months apart, with completely different people. So this was a really tough time in my life, and that was when I was 18. I'm currently 26, so it's been 8 years about, and it's definitely been a journey, just learning, processing everything. I did have like 2 years of just trying to learn how to process it, not going it now in hindsight, didn't approach it the healthiest way, but I am using that now as, how can I say it? I use my experience now as a way to provide awareness to others, and so that's why I'm openly sharing my story. That way, maybe people can learn from my quote unquote mistakes or just the way I handled it, and just letting people know they're not alone. I just briefly did touch on like the first year or two, I handled it through, hookups and one night stands because I thought it was, if I can take control of the situation in my power, then I was taking that part of myself back in a sense. When in reality, I hadn't done any healing. It was more of like a source of way of finding validation, a way of disassociating numbness. And through therapy, I've been able to recognize why I did those things and give myself grace. I would say that was the biggest part, where giving myself grace and forgiving myself, because that's not really who I am. And it, like you said, it's a survival mechanism. I was just trying to survive and process and figure out, how do I move forward with this. And the biggest thing I think that's helped me is talking about it with a therapist, now through the podcasts, through people like Larry, just sharing my story, bringing awareness to other people, for people listening. If people in your life aren't supportive or tell you you're lying or downplay it, that is not true. Your whatever experience is valid. It doesn't matter what scale it was, if it's complete like full penetration or just like groping or harassment. If you were uncomfortable in any level,
Yes.
you are valid for feeling like something wrong happened. And so it's the biggest thing. You're valid in however you feel. Seek a therapist, seek medical help. If reporting is the way you want to go, I hope you have a support system that can help you through that process. If not reporting it is the way you feel best, that is also totally okay. I never reported mine because at the time I just felt like I didn't have the support system to do so. Um, and granted, I'll be honest, there are times where it hits me, like whether it's a dream or I've had instances with past partners. They grabbed me a certain type of way and it takes me back to that moment and I'll literally break down and start crying. But learning and recognizing that's okay, that's normal. It was a traumatic event. You went through something horrible that no one should ever go through. And just giving yourself grace to know growth and progress is not linear. It's going to have its ups and downs. It might have some step backs, but as long as you keep pushing forward, I again strongly suggest therapy. Find a good therapist. If maybe you found one that is not supportive, go find another one. Not everybody finds their perfect therapist right away. You kind of have to look and shop around, kind of like dating. So just give
Yeah.
yourself patience and understanding. And for people that maybe want to learn about my experience or get some insight, recommend listening to the first episode is on with Larry, that we can learn more. And just know you're not alone. Like my social media, like I'm online, you can find me through the platform that Larry will share and all that. I'm always a message away or even a phone call away. And so just want to remind people, like, you're not alone and it's going to get better. I promise you. It might take some time, but it will get better.
I can agree with that, and I can second that wholeheartedly. Everyone's going to face difficulties in their lives, some that are greater and more traumatic than others. Just understand that you are not alone in whatever that experience was. And also, if you're a friend of a friend of a friend, or if you know of anyone who is a little overly aggressive when it comes to dealing with the opposite gender, or even just smaller people in general, just say something. I mean, not everything has to escalate into an actual altercation, but just letting them know that you see them, letting them know that what they're doing is not okay, are all great ways to help kind of bridge that gap.
Hmm.
So, one thing I did want to do is transition from going over that survivor story and then kind of the roles that society plays in creating these relationships, its role in creating a situation to where it is okay for someone to doubt or to shame or to even push out, ignore, not listen to. And that goes for both genders. We have men who have friends who are men who commit crimes like this or just commit atrocities like this. And then we have women that are friends. And then we have a society in general that just kind of allows us to progress. There's too many open secrets that we all know about. Harvey Weinstein wasn't the only one. Jeffrey Epstein weren't the only ones getting away in this open means of doing this terrible thing. And if you just see something, say something. I mean, and if it doesn't go any further than that, at least you can look in the mirror, rest your head at night, and believe and understand that you did something to try to make the world a little bit better than it was the day before. And I definitely wish you all the best of luck because this is going to be difficult. Everything in life is going to be difficult, but it is going to be worth it. And if you are going through difficult times and you look at yourself and you say, man, this is so bad, just realize that you have the state of mind to actually look in that mirror and say that you're still there. And that is a victory in itself. Still being there, still persisting, and still pushing is something that you can be proud of and something that you can take solace in. And then,
Hmm.
like Zaira said, there are people out there that are willing to help and listen, even if they don't know you any personal, like very personally or not. People are there and they're willing to help and listen.
Hmm.
So, Zaira, in regards to how society kind of plays its own part in creating these relationship dynamics, how would you say it affected you growing up from being younger as well as up until today with, just day-to-day life. I guess social expectations would be a better question.
Yeah, I so some context, I grew up in a Christian household. And so, the whole thing of saving yourself to marriage and just the whole thing of sex is kind of a taboo subject. Not necessarily in my household, but just I went to Christian schools and just going to church, like that's just kind of the thing, right? So, girls, especially girls, like don't have sex, don't like you don't talk about it and all that. Um, so I think that kind of carried a layer of naiveness. And then um for men growing up, I all my friends growing up were guys, majorly. So, hearing the way they talked about girls or their attitudes, there was just always kind of a disconnect in the sense of like I would hear guys like basically locker room talk, talking about this girl this girl that, oh this girl sent me a picture, this and that. Oh, she's a fill in the word, fill in the slur. So it was kinda hard to navigate that, and then especially growing up when boys would start messaging me, start asking for pictures and try to guilt trip you and pressure you into doing it, and or now you're going to high school with, like, boyfriends and stuff, they try to push the boundaries, and I'll openly admit, I think I had a really hard time with boundaries just because of my family circumstance. I grew up with a narcissistic mom, so boundaries was never something I was able to have. And so I think it was hard for me to see clearly where the line was or what my boundaries were. And if I felt like I had to be pressured into it just to get some validation or that was just what's expected of me. But now, kind of like social constructs, I think there's a big influence. And I talk to this with people, they're more like men in their 40s and 50s, where they share like their generation, where there was an expectation of you push the boundaries because how do you know if it's a yes or a no? And then for women, you're like no one talks to you about these things. So I would assume for women back then, at least it was for me now, there's no like mental preparation of how to say no or how to state your boundaries and just learning to not put up with that shit, I would say. And so I like that now there's more discussion about it and we still have a long ways to go, of course, but it seems now there's just more awareness like you don't do that. Like if no is said, no means no. Be respectful. Like you said earlier, if you see something, say something. Um so that's been kind of my experience and I think that's why when those things happened to me, it was really hard to wrap my head around just because there's always been a bit of a disconnect on especially with someone that you know personally. You don't expect someone personally that you know to do something like that. You expect it more for like stranger danger. So I think going forward, like socially, we need to bring more awareness of who it could be from, who does these type of things, like the stats, like just being a lot more vocal about that. I hope
I
that
would
answered your
agree.
question.
No, it does, and I would agree. It's funny because we are from 2 separate generations in a way. I am closer to the group of guys who had this idea of an opposition between the genders. It was you have the guys over here who want sex all the time, and then you have the girls over here who also want sex, but they're supposed to tell you no. So you
Mhm.
have to convince them that it's okay to say
Mm,
yes. And that was the approach I would have. It was kind of like always this conquest or trying to go out and win a game, so to speak. And as you get older, you kind of just realize that both parties, if there's nothing more important than a hookup and both people understand that, it's completely okay. But if you're a man and you're out there and you're presenting that this is going to be something more than just a hookup, it's actually kind of chicken shit. Like you're kind
mhm.
of a coward. And I could say that because I have been that coward until I got into my 20s and kind of found more of myself. When I was younger, I was making promises of dates and being together and hanging out, and at the time there was no Netflix and chill. It was just, hey, do you want to go to the park? So it's just it's a it's kind of a funny go around. because I myself would pride myself on having high numbers and thinking that that's what it took to actually make you some kind of solid male. When the reality of the situation is getting it, great, but how you get it does mean something.
Mhm.
And if you're out there and you're trying to have, encounters with the opposite gender, I would suggest finding confidence in yourself first and being okay to say no. Because trust me, guys, when you say no, it really, really works. Like, it really, really works. I promise you that. And I mean, it goes way further because you change the pursue and the pursuee versus the pursued. It's not, you learn it in sales as well. If you take it away, and sometimes people would want what you're removing from the offer on the table, and just having a little bit more self confidence. I realized that for myself, the majority of this stemmed from a lack of confidence and thinking that that would add to making me more of a man, which in turn makes me more confident. And as you get older, as you spend time just going throughout life, you realize that that's not really it. I mean, I myself can tell you that I wish I can go back, not do like 99% of what I've done, and it was just my wife. And I'm not saying anyone needs to have one partner. I'm not saying that at all. It's just that knowing what I know, the amount of drama, the amount of like juggling and things that that took, just a big waste of time. There's so much more you can do, whether it's working on yourself and developing a better inner person, or just going out and making money, or just doing something that makes you happy, whether that's surfing, whether that's walking, running, jogging. There are just so many other outlets in the world than trying to conquer other human beings. I promise you it's worth it.
Mhm.
100%. Just make sure you're going to the gym at least. No video games are cool, but not too much.
Yeah.
You gotta make sure.
Get some endorphins going, walk. At least walk, like, go
Agreed.
outside. Yeah.
Touch grass, as they say, go touch grass,
Feel the
and trust me,
breeze.
it'll make you happier and it'll make you more desirable, because if you're outside and you're happy, just your entire aura
Mhm.
changes, and if you're inside and you're constantly miserable and you're constantly absorbing these negative images, it doesn't help you, like, I can promise you that.
No,
Now, one
absolutely.
one thing I did wanna kind of transition into with that is discussing the red pill and
Mhm.
how the red pill kind of ends up creating a bit of I wouldn't want to say like 100% outright it's rape culture. But what it does is it creates an enemy of the opposite gender. It creates an enemy of the female versus the male. It creates opposition. And in doing so, you want to see the other side lose. When the reality is, these women are also sisters, mothers, aunts, aunts, the person at Starbucks. These are also just human beings, and they're also going through enough things in their own life. And are you familiar with the red pill much, Syra?
A little bit, but if you can kinda go over more for me and some listeners, that way, we have a good basis.
For sure. The red pill is presented predominantly as the manosphere. And within the manosphere, they have male traits that they consider to be hyper masculine. And in order to become what is deemed a high value man or a high value male, you need to do a couple things. You need to get in the gym and be fit. That's something I can agree with. You need to go out there and make six figures. I will tell you all, six figures is not for everyone. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes in making that type of income, and a lot of people just decide that it's not worth it. And constantly placing pressure on yourself to try to get there without actually taking the necessary steps to get there is only going to make you bitter and angry. If you want to make six figures, then by all means, do all the things that it takes to make those six figures. But doing anything that's going to be get rich quick, it's not going to work. It is not going to work. It only works for a couple people at the top, and those people want to keep pumping this idea that you're not good enough unless you make X amount of dollars.
Mhm.
And then one of the third major traits is going to be a guy who is out there and getting the respect of other men and also the capability to bag women, so to speak.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the red pill in a nutshell. I myself do not have direct opposition with all points and parts of the red pill. It's just it's a lot of responsibility. Like, those traits are not easy to embody, they're not easy to do, and then it creates an atmosphere where you have people that don't live up to those traits who still feel like they're owed something, and if they don't get what they're owed, they lash out. That comes in the form of, you know, a guy at a party looking for a drunk girl that's easier. That comes from seeing that guy looking for that girl at a party and not saying anything because blame is placed on the person who is either inebriated or just kind of left out alone by their friends.
Mhm.
And it creates a society and an idea that doing those things are okay because everyone should watch out for themselves, quote unquote. And for me, those are the toxic traits of the red pill, and I think that that's super harmful to young men and young women because you're placing this box around people and these high standards that not very many people live up to. Like, there's a reason there's a 1%, 5%,
Mhm.
3%, and everything in between. Those things exist because it's hard and not everyone wants to make those sacrifices. And I mean, you don't need to lash out at somebody that's quote unquote weaker than you to make yourself feel better. Just make yourself better. So that's the red pill in a nutshell.
Yeah. I think there are some good qualities, but like anything, there's a balance. If you go one far way too deep in like the red pill, then you're bringing up all those toxic traits. And I think there's a lot of, at least I'm hearing it more, like what it actually means to be a man, like being in your masculine, the healthy masculine versus what I think what society pushes, and that ends up carrying a lot of the toxic traits. So I think there's just a lot more of that conversation going on, masculine versus feminine. And it's really interesting to hear kind of from men, they're trying to push more, at least say more, there is no good man. Like there should just be man. Like man should just be good. It's just society now has all these like unrealistic expectations or agendas that now makes it that there are bad men, which ends up overlapping what men should be.
I agree. I mean, you have a society that's like trying to make this perfect role of man, and that anyone that kind of ventures outside of it, because they're being ostracized and just kind of subjugated to their own subculture and subgroups, they become resentful. And that resentment embodies itself and lashes out. Because I mean, most of the time, like if you look in these communities, and I'm not saying this to be hurtful in any way to the men and women that are a part of them, but you don't typically find the prime subjects of a gender, you
Hmm.
tend to find the leftovers, and the leftovers are frustrated because they can't quote unquote get anybody. But I mean, there's a constant argument where they make fun of and shame women for wanting a better man than they quote unquote deserve. And then they're doing the same thing by wanting better women than they quote unquote deserve. I mean, if you're a guy, you still live at home with your mother. I mean, and again, it's okay, the economy's rough, but I mean, that does kind of lower your tier a bit. If you're still
Hmm.
living at home, you know, if you're playing video games all day, if you're smoking weed, if you're drinking, you're not working out. Like, I mean, if you're not trying to embody any of those other traits, yet you think you deserve a high quality woman or a high value woman, I mean, you might need to look at the mirror and reevaluate. I mean, it goes both ways and it's okay. Like, it's completely okay. I mean, everybody wants to have the best. It's just in order to get the best, you need to do what you need. I mean, you can't go to McDonald's and demand that they serve you a Morton steak. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you kick and scream, it's just not gonna happen. You can get that Big Mac and be happy with that almost meat. That's just kind of the way it is.
Hmm.
And it's unfortunate because it's a movement that could have helped embody the traditional traits of masculinity, but instead, it just really embodied everything that makes it toxic. And I'm not a big proprietor of using the word toxic masculinity, but that does become toxic in the wrong hands. It's like that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, there's responsibility, and if you're gonna be a provider, if you're gonna be a sole income earner, there's sacrifices you need to make. Like, I mean, my wife and I'm sole income earner now, so I don't get to spend as much time with my son as I'd like, and that's just an exchange that has to be made in order to make this situation work out, and that's just the way life is, unfortunately. But fortunately as well, because that allows me to feel good to say, "You know what? I know that my son's not gonna be indoctrinated into any information that I deem unnecessary for the time or age he may be, and he'll have the options to be homeschooled or go to private school or go to public school, and he'll have those options." And to me, the best thing in life is to have the option to do so, because
Mhm.
when you're pigeonholed to do one thing or another, it kind of forces you down a road whether you wanna go down it or not. And, I mean, opportunity and options are all we can really ask for.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it's so good that you and your wife have had the discussions beforehand, before your son, and have that partnership, the us now, to move forward. And that way your son is able to see healthy dynamics. And when he's come to age, you can explain to him, like, like especially with you being the sole provider, it's not that, oh, I'm the only one working because your mom needs to be at home as the care, like the home provider caretaker. It's like, no, it's just you guys had the discussion and agreed upon it. But if the roles were reversed, that would have been equally okay or acceptable.
Correct. And I mean, one thing that we all need to understand is the exchange is always going to be something. I mean, just because you go make the primary amount of income, it doesn't mean that the other person is not doing anything. I mean, maintaining a household, that in itself is a full-time job. In our household, we try to be a little bit more green friendly. So we make all of our cleaners, we make all of our soaps, as you know. And I
Mhm.
mean, we do those things because we try to close the loop when it comes to products that exist out in the world. We try to make sure that we use it till its entirety and then spread it out as far as we can among other things. And I mean, for us, that's what works. And it takes one person. Like, it either takes two people who can do half of it or one person who can do all of it.
Mhm.
And it's heavy. It's a heavy load. And I respect the hell out of my wife for doing that.
Well, what do you say are maybe like the biggest things in regards to the red pill that need to be discussed more or more awareness on?
I think the true embodiment of those masculine qualities that they say that they want men to exemplify. And what that entails is if another guy is acting out of line, then he should be checked. Something should be said. If and the way they use this terminology of alpha, beta, and sigma and all these things. Yes, we're animals and we have innate, you know, primitive drives that still exist within us. However, I mean, modernization in society has, in a way, curtailed that a bit. So, if you're a person out there that has high anger issues, get into exercise, get into a sport, get into doing something with your hands, become a gardener. Don't just let that energy get dispersed amongst your peers because you're bigger than a few people or smaller than a few people and think that you can get away with saying stuff. This is a world that needs to accept a little bit more understanding. I mean, not everybody is the quote unquote 6'5", chiseled jawline Chad or Tyrone. Not everybody is going to do that or be that. So just find out what you are, accept that, and then become the absolute best version of that.
Mhm.
And don't blame anyone else. Just take that responsibility and be accountable on yourself. And I'm telling you, like, things will change immediately, regardless of they also kind of lean heavy into, like, the conspiracy theory of, like, QAnon and
Mm.
oh god, you get QAnon, you get the JQ question, which is the Jewish question about how they're manipulating and controlling the world, and, I mean, just take a moment and say these things out loud to somebody else, and then just listen to their retort, and then just listen to that. And then realize just how funny that sounds.
Mm.
Like, really, you're gonna say that there's no responsibility on yourself and its effect on the world, and that there's this giant shadowy government that's doing it to you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do. It's like, well, if that's the way you look at the world, I wouldn't consider that a man at all. I
Right.
would consider that somebody who's too weak to accept the responsibility, that they say they want. Like, I mean, yeah.
That's the thing. I think one of the biggest things I've observed in regards to men that have been in my life, where, as men, I think men really need to accept that they need to be accountable and responsible. Like, responsibility is a big one. I think, like, as a man, you're obviously bigger, stronger than females. That's just genetics, right? So you need to take on responsibility that you play a role in, whether it's providing financially or literally like protecting, just taking care of your family, your friends, like just being there. And I think men say they want that role, but then they don't do it. And so there ends up being that disconnect with, people like me that were females, but we end up stepping more into the masculine because we have to step in. And there ends up creating that resentment, or just, there was another point I was going to make, but I think the biggest thing I've noticed is just men say they want the responsibility, but then they can't be accountable. They don't take the accountability when they don't actually act on it, and ends up being a whole mess.
Oh, agree. And I mean, even as a society, like all of us, recently there was a young girl who was assaulted at a McDonald's, and everyone by an adult woman, and everyone took their phones out and they recorded the assault. I mean, you can't. This is the thing that's so frustrating to me because you have all these people who get swept up in these movements, and they'll put a black square up in the corner of their business or on their social media profile, and they'll allow another person in society be assaulted like this. And to me, that's outside of race or gender. That's more of a personal responsibility we need to take. Like, we need to care a little bit more because that could be us. Like, that really could be us on the receiving end of something very bad. And in that situation, we would hope and pray someone would say something.
Mhm.
I mean, even if someone just called the cops, which didn't occur until after, even if someone just said, "Hey, stop." Like, it really doesn't take much, and I understand that that's scary, but, I mean, I think it's scarier living in a world where everyone just acts however they feel,
Mhm.
and you have adults attacking children and people letting that be okay. I think that's a scarier world than what could happen if you tell someone to stop doing that, but I think that's why I was always into Westerns. When I was younger, I used to love watching a good Western because there was a
Right.
good guy who's like, "I'm tired of this, I'm gonna stand up," and then the other people stand up because one person is standing up.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna say good guy like it's only men. Like, it goes both ways. Like, I
Mhm.
believe that men need to hold other men accountable, and women need to hold other women accountable so that
Mhm.
we can hold each other accountable and
Mhm.
just stop all this, like, senseless violence. It's pointless. But, I mean, I'm speaking from a privileged position, so I also have to accept that and understand that. But, fingers crossed things get better.
Right, and, again, it comes from conversations like this where we just open the dialogue, and, not everybody has to agree because everyone can have their opinion, but just opening at least the dialogue for the discussion to be had, I think is the first step towards that.
I agree, and I think having a good disagreement with someone is just as good as having a good agreeing conversation with them, because it allows you to see the points and the humanity of the other side versus it being this, like, good or evil. Like,
Mhm.
good or evil? How about just potentially right and potentially wrong,
Mhm.
or just another person and their point of view and view on life? I mean, yeah, I would agree. I think society's role in creating that red pill arc that we've kind of gone on, which I think is kind of dying off now. The Andrew Tates, the Fresh and
Yeah.
Fits of the world, they're losing steam. Which, I mean, in all honesty, it's gonna be a better thing. Hopefully, whatever comes to replace those voices is going to be something that's more along the lines of positivity. And if not, we'll just continue this cyclical loop of insanity. But, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
One little step at a time. We're like, "All right, we'll get there."
Hoping so. So in that respect, I'm wondering, you have a very unique perspective. Your perspective is fairly traditional, yet also heavily involved with modern and progressive ideas. I
Mhm.
mean, from talking to you, you can tell that you are extremely feminine, but you're also very strong. And at times, because you have the, I don't want to say majority, but you have a large group of men who, they say they want one thing, but they can't accept it, or they don't want to take the responsibility that comes with it. How does that affect your, I guess, better yet to start with this, what is a good guy to you? Like, what's a good choice of men? Like, what's a guy that you consider that's a top tier guy to me?
Yeah, like my ideal man. I would say so we'll talk about like the healthy masculine, at least what that means to me. Someone that can lead, you know, mm, I don't want to say assertive because people can take that the wrong way. Like, obviously, you're not pushing boundaries, but they're assertive, they have drive, they know what they want, they can communicate. Like, that's a big one. Like, not that's mostly men, but like just people in general just don't know how to communicate or just be vulnerable. Like, vulnerability is also another big thing. Um, Growing up, since I am pretty independent, like I am feminine, but I do have my masculine traits. I think I need someone that one for sure view me as an equal because I think you go down like the more toxic traits where one gender's above the other, and like to me that's all BS. But someone that can respect my differences, is wanting to push me to be my best, support. I again for me a big thing is family. Values is a huge one. Do we have aligned values? Are our priorities majorly the same? Like, can we be a good partner? Like, are you there? Do I know you're going to have my back? Because I know I'm going to have yours. So I think, and when it all boils down to someone that just one can lead, can communicate, and I guess like emotional intelligence, just self aware, because that's a big one. That's really hard for a lot of people. So someone that's just aware of their emotions, knows what's going on, and can effectively communicate with me or anybody, hey, this is where I'm at. And that way we can like, okay, well, what do we need to do to get to a better place? Or from point A to point B, what do we need to do to get there? So I would say, in terms of traits, that is my ideal man. On the physical side, like we'll throw that in there too. I again, I like men that are a little taller than me. I'm Hispanic, so like obviously majority of like Hispanics aren't that tall. So I think it comes into the more like animalistic nature side of someone taller. I think
Protection, things of
right.
that nature.
That way my kids are a little taller. Please don't get offended, my guys listening. um,
Short kings stand up, as they
Short
say.
king, we love short kings. I just personally, have a little preference for someone a little taller. Um, Obviously healthy, active, fit, because I prioritize that. So I want somebody to prioritize that. Someone that takes care of themselves, hygiene. I'm surprised I have to say that, but not all guys. I'll
Oh,
say just some of y'all gotta learn a little bit. It's okay.
yeah.
um, but I guess in a nutshell, like that is like the ideal man, in terms of like what it means to be good. Just someone that takes care of their people, can take care of somebody, and has a selfless heart, and you know just just be a good person. Yeah.
And I think those are good traits. I mean, if you're a guy and you embody these traits, you more than likely do not have the worst luck with women. Um, I would also say you don't need to apologize for your preferences. I
Hmm.
mean, preferences are preferences, and
Hmm.
that's just how it is. I mean, there's people out there who prefer shorter people, there are people out there who prefer taller people, and every other color of the rainbow. So don't apologize for that. I say don't
Thank you.
apologize for that, and yeah, just be good with that. Just be happy with that. And I will say, one thing that I've done since our last conversation, what I'll do is I'll go back over a couple of questions I've asked you before,
Hmm.
in regards to kind of creating that life that you want It's kinda like an open game of MASH. Did you ever play that when you were younger?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect, yeah. It's a
Love
lot
it.
like it's an open game of MASH, so to speak. The difference is this time what I've done is I applied census statistics, with how likely these things are to occur, and outside of how likely they're going to occur, what can be done to help make them more likely or less likely
Oh,
depending on certain preferences. So one thing that we did before is Zaira shared with me a couple of gentlemen. I will use that term gentlemen that she had come across or stumbled upon, so to speak. And what we did was, in order to protect their, anonymity, I'll go by the letter in their name. That's going to be fairly obvious to her, especially when I go through the. And we're going to go over that. That we're not going to jump directly into that. First, we're going to find out what Zyra wants. And then once we find out what Zyra wants, what it takes to get there, and if any of the fellas that were submitted are have the potential, are already there. There we go. That
mhm.
was a mouthful. Okay, so very first one. One quick sec
This is
here.
fun, I'm excited.
Me too. This is actually the first time I'm doing this.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
excited.
Yeah, I've done this, indirectly for friends before, and it seems to work out well. So, yeah, let's see how this works here.
Okay,
I've
okay.
got high hopes for it.
Yay.
So, in regards to you mentioning that you're big on family,
Mhm.
did you wanna have children?
Yes.
Okay, and what's, like, the least amount of children you would wanna have?
Minimum 2.
Okay, perfect.
I think max 4.
Okay. Okay, so it's, like, 2 so that you don't have the only child.
Yes.
Trust me, it's not a good look. I'm an only child. 2 at least so you can have the only child, and then a maximum of 4. Hopefully,
Yeah.
you don't end up with 2 sets of triplets. That's
I
how I look at it.
1 triplet, okay, we're done. Closing up shop.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm like, we're already there because 'cause you're gonna need to have some sanity, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then, in regards to height, what would you say is the minimum height?
Ideally 5'10". I'm
Okay,
5'1" for people listening.
so 5'10" and above.
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. And in regards to lifestyle, is there a do you have a city or state in mind, that you see yourself living in and raising a family?
So, my long-term goal is to open up a business in San Luis Obispo County.
Okay,
So, that is definitely an area I'm highly considering. I'm also very open. So, ideally, as long as I'm close enough to visit family frequently or even if it's out of state, I but in terms of, like, a specific county, we'll just throw San Luis Obispo County in California.
okay. Well, I mean, honestly, just California in comparison to the rest of the 49 50 states, yeah, California's pricey.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That's the thing, that's where I've considered, like, I love Washington, Seattle, so I'm open to that, I'm also open to Colorado, but anything east of that is a hard no for me.
I'd have to agree. I'd have to agree. Now,
West Coast.
in regards to, I guess, the type of lifestyle you want, do you want your children to have their own rooms?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm,
And in regards to like family trips, would the family trips be local staycations? Would you want to do, maybe statewide travel, or would you want to travel with them internationally? I would say per year. So like one trip, two trips, or potentially every other year. Like what
mhm.
do you envision for that?
Ideally, if finances wasn't an issue, 1 international trip and then 1 trip within the States every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in regards to home life, I take it you would need a car in California, and basically West Coast in general.
You need a
You're
car.
gonna, yeah. So that would be one for you, one for them, and for your children when they turn 16. Did you want to be able to help purchase their car, or did you want them to work in order to earn the money for their car?
That's a good question. So, in regards to their car, I'm definitely very okay with purchasing a car for them. Um, but this is actually something I want to throw out. So, this is something I've thought about in regards to dating. I think where I'm at with it is a rule or a guideline I might have is whenever they want to start dating, they need to be able to work to pay for their own dates. And so that's kind of like the age. Like if you can manage school and working and stay on top of your classes, then I know you're responsible enough to date. So
Yeah.
just throwing that out there. That's kind of where I'm at. But in terms of the car, I would definitely be okay with paying to help for the car, depending on the child. If I know they're responsible enough, I think. If they're
Agreed.
not, then I think I would make them wait for their license.
Agreed, because there could be some wild childs out there. Like, yeah.
Right. You never know. So I think that's where I'm at. Like, oh, we'll have to see.
Okay, and then in regards now, are you race exclusive or are you open to all races?
So I
And it's okay to
Mhm.
have a preference.
I'll be totally candid. I do like my white boys. All my past relationships have been white boys. The people I've seen have been mostly white. And the only times where I'm not open to a race is when it comes to the culture and religion aspect. If it's opposing with mine, then I feel like there's no point to explore that further. If it's like religion, if it's a big like opposing, then that creates a lot of problems in terms of culture where women are viewed as secondary. That's not okay with me. So I think that's where I would be not open to certain races.
Okay, so you want for want of a better term, someone who has more of an American mindset in that regard,
Yeah.
versus so even if someone was Muslim from a Muslim from a Muslim country, you would prefer to have someone with more American ideas in terms of like the relationships and how things go along that. You
Right,
don't want to
right.
you don't want to walk 10 paces or
That
12 paces behind your partner. Okay,
right. Yeah, I think like I'm Mexican, but I'm very Americanized because I'm fourth generation, right? So if someone is of a different ethnicity or culture, but they're also Americanized, to me that'd be ideal because you're
okay.
blending cultures in a kind of modern way. But when it comes to like you're stepping behind or you only sit in the back seat, like you're only spoken to like when appropriate, like I'm like, okay, wait, well, that's not compatible.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally see that. And then final question, in
Mhm.
regards to, are you familiar with the passport bros movement?
No.
Oh, passport bros are basically guys who are traveling to other countries in order to find their mates, because they do want a female who embodies those more traditional values.
Yeah.
On the surface, it looks like they're basically getting mail order brides. The
Uh-huh.
way I kind of see it is it's basically a person who doesn't necessarily do as well here without sounding kinda, like, jerky. They
Yeah.
don't do necessarily as well here to have such high demands because there's just a higher standard of living in America,
Mhm.
so their dollar, quote, unquote, "goes further" in these other countries so that they're able to acquire a higher tier of partner, so to speak, and,
Mm.
it's an interesting, movement.
Huh.
For myself, it's not something I would
Yeah.
necessarily have ever done. I never saw myself going somewhere else to get a wife. I mean, going somewhere else and having fun, that's always great, but I was not a go find my wife somewhere else. I figured if at when I was younger, I didn't even wanna get married, but if I at the time, I just knew I could get a wife here, and I could
Right.
get the type of woman I wanted as long as I paid the dues in order to deserve the type of woman I would necessarily want.
Mhm.
So, I can see that there. The reason I bring that up is you do have a lot of, what people would consider I guess if you're using a grading scale, those are like the B and C plus students,
Mhm.
the B and C plus students. So that does kind of create this chasm here, that we have is where we have the C minus D F students, and then you have the A and A plus students. And
Mhm.
because there's not as much in between, it actually has greatly affected the numbers in terms of available quality mates.
Okay.
So that actually comes apart a little bit of the calculation that was done here.
Okay.
Um, Pretty much, it's actually a good thing that you prefer white males or that you like white males or that you're open to white males, because that actually gives you the largest source pool, to pull from. So
Mhm.
that's actually a very good thing, uh, both, in terms of numerically as well as even when it comes out to, like, economically. Looking at what you would want out of life. Oh, very last question, actually. In regards to responsibility that you would have to have for the family. So, basically, like, if you didn't work, the family's quality of life would downgrade, substantially. percentage wise, about how much would you want to be responsible for?
That's I guess off the top of my head, I would think, or are we talking strictly financially?
Correct, strictly
Okay,
financially.
okay. Oof, man, damn, that's hard. Because I like on the last episode we talked about would I be okay being, the home take care like caretaker, or would I be okay being the breadwinner? And I said it really just depend on circumstance. I'm okay with both. Um, so we'll just go based off of, like typical dynamics where, the man is more of the breadwinner and the wife, does more of the responsibilities with the home and family.
Okay.
Um,
60-40, like around there.
yeah, yeah, like I just always envisioned myself it'd be 50-50.
Okay.
But that's
We can
how
we
I
can
that yeah, well, we go with 50-50 because that's just how I always pictured, like equal partnership. So we'll go 50-50.
okay. So, just to kind of give you an idea, where you would want to be is that's about a basically it's a middle class to upper middle class lifestyle. This isn't quite adjusted for, the recession we're basically kind of sliding into
Right.
now,
Yeah.
and all of the inflation. God, I tell you, we don't buy meat and our groceries are still like $200, and I grow so much of my own stuff. So, yeah, it's insane. But,
That
uh,
yeah.
basically, you would need to be, the 2 of you each making about 125, $130,000 a year.
Mhm.
And the what do you think the average is for the amount of people that make over $120,000 a year?
Oh god. Mm, definitely below 50%, right? Yeah.
It's a lot lower.
T between 25-30.
5%. Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, okay, so 5% makes over 100 in California or
Oh,
in
no,
the
that's
US?
that's in the entire US. The good thing, though, is California, like major cities, typically have the highest concentrations of it.
Mhm.
Los Angeles, Seattle, Silicon Valley,
I
those are
guess that's why
extremely
I
high.
thought it was so much higher because, that's the demographic I've grown up on. So, like, that's always been the expectation. Like, that how my father raised me was, you get educated, you're gonna get a good job. So it's always been an expectation of mine, like, I will reach that bracket at some point. But
Yeah.
oh, wow.
Yeah, crossing that plateau, I remember the first time when I was younger, I did, and it was like that was to me, I thought that was the finish line, and then
Mhm.
you realize that when you're surrounded by people who are at that level, you realize how you really rank and how you're at the bottom of that tier. But in order and these numbers, the $250,000 a year, that's based on not taking on like massive debt, like
Mhm.
credit cards and things of that nature. But it's also just imagining a modest vehicle. If you go with so it'd be like a Toyota, Honda, maybe like
Mhm.
an Acura Infinity. And then if like a lot of people, they want to go German, they want to go Mercedes, or they want a
Yeah.
Range Rover, then that does adjust things as well. I'm
Mhm.
a person who likes to carry as little to 0 debt as possible. So this was spec'd out at about a 10% debt to income ratio. And, in regards to home ownership, did you wanna own or rent?
Oh, for sure.
Own, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
which is
yes.
hard right now. So, hopefully sometime soon can do that, but
Just hang on a little bit. We're
yeah.
we're just hang on a little bit, save as
Mhm.
much as you can.
Mhm.
We're gonna get to a point to where owning is gonna be a thing again,
Yeah.
and, I mean, even as the rates kind of increase, this is also just a little sidebar. Um, as the rates kind of increase now, there's gonna be a massive drop in the home sale price,
Yeah.
and there's typically about a 15 to 20-year rollover where our rates are gonna probably hit 7 to 12%, and then what will happen is a lot of people aren't gonna be able to afford these homes, so the government are gonna subvent the rates and buy those rates down, and then you'll get back to the I don't think we'll see 1, 2, or 3 again, but you'll get back to the 4, 5, and 6, and that's when you refinance. You
Mhm.
don't take money out of your home, you just refinance to get the lower rate, and that'll lower your home payment by, I mean, thousands, depending
Yeah.
on the price of your property.
Yeah.
So I strongly recommend, but keep your eye out. keep looking
Mhm.
around. Opportunities are going to arise there, like,
Mhm.
definitely. And
Yeah.
it'll slide back on
Right.
topic again.
Right.
So what that leaves you is that leaves you with a very select group of men that are gonna be able to fulfill that.
Mhm.
Now, you're gonna run into, like, what are some signs that a person makes, that type of income? And a lot of times, especially here in California, we attribute that to car and things of that nature.
Mhm.
That is gonna mostly be debt. So that is actually gonna remove quite a bit of men because
Mhm.
125, $150,000, there's only select, professions that make that, and then outside of those select professions, you have a few people who are relatively lucky, like they're the top tier salesperson, or they're a person who got lucky and invested into Bitcoin, or they invested
Mhm.
into some kind of, like, cryptocurrency. So that does become a rarer pool, and that's before you start looking at, like, the height, and also, are they gonna be attractive, or are they gonna be odd and smelly? Which is actually kind of it's not as rare as you would imagine nowadays,
Right.
unfortunately. Yeah, I remember when I realized it, I was like, "Why does everyone smell so bad? Everyone smells like
Yes.
BO and Axe. This is
Some
not
people are
good."
stinky. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's like soap is it's like the I was watching one show that was red pill centered, and they had a guy who was talking about it's like, "Yo, if you're brushing your teeth in the evening and in the morning, you're so far ahead." It's like if after having such a long day, you're still willing to brush your teeth, that places you so far ahead of so many people. I'm like, "Wait, what? Just brushing your teeth?"
I thought that was like a given. That's crazy.
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, and that's, like, the odd norm, and I personally don't get it, but, I mean, that's what's out there. So, what you would wanna do and this is
Mhm.
a little bit from, like, that dating sniper, session that I told you about.
Yeah.
You wanna kind of focus on the professions and the type of personalities that kind of align within those professions.
Mhm.
The good thing is you're a person who's willing to, actually take on an amount, a substantial amount of the income, to help add to that. So that does make it a little bit easier versus looking for a person who makes $250,000 a year,
Right.
which actually places you below the 1% range then in terms of finding that person, which is crazy. Like
That's crazy.
it's insane. Like trust me. And I when I realized it and looking at the numbers, because I've heard these numbers regurgitated before, but they were usually from older studies from like 2008 or 2002. And I mean, just the dollar went further. So, if you made 60, it was like making 120, or excuse me,
Mhm.
like making 85, 90 at the time. And now, I mean, 120 is going to end up being, closer to the middle class versus the upper middle class, which is crazy to me.
Right.
And one thing I would suggest is while you're out there looking for a partner, that you keep these things in mind because a good, strong, ambitious man is good. However, you need to consider it's like, well, let's say, let's go ahead and pull one of the notes up here. So let's say if you're a man
Mhm.
and you are in a profession that allows you to make anywhere between 75 to 95, $1,000 a year, especially something along the lines of like construction management, along those lines. There are people that can hit that $195,000 range doing something like that. However, the likelihood of that occurring means that they're like the top of the top of the top project manager and construction manager that companies are bidding to kind of take on.
Mhm.
And if that person who is typically a conservative Christian and leaning towards, wanting more traditional values, then the two of you would have to keep in mind that if those are the traditional values that that person would want to take, that would then kind of place you in a price bracket of, well, if you're working, he's working, and then that means you need to do the predominant amount of, home care and taking care of the children.
Mhm.
That's kind of like a recipe for resentment.
Yep, yep.
And especially if that's a person that's going to say, well, this is what has to happen, that isn't necessarily setting you up for the most success. So that's a person with the letter N. I will
Mhm.
say, from the most part, seems like a very solid, decent human being.
Mhm.
That was kind of like the thing that I got from them.
I'm pulling
Um,
up the photos I sent you, that way I just
okay,
have a face reference, but continue talking, please.
okay, no problem. Um, there would need to be a confirmation of that person wanting children, as well as how many. Open to kids, like kids are a major responsibility. And when going into that, it's not something that I would recommend anyone take lightly. Like, if having children is something that's on the docket, definitely look into what it's actually going to take, and if they want children, that means they need to be aware of the sacrifices they need to make in order to provide opportunities for their children.
Mhm.
And, I mean, we're getting into a world where conservative Christian values are going to, I don't wanna say come under fire, but there are gonna be opposing ideas and values and traditions that are taught that, someone from that background may not want their child, in place in front of them. So that would then mean private school.
Right.
And then private school that goes up to, yeah, I believe it's like 10 to 20,000 a year, depending on where you go out here.
Yeah, I only went to private school, so, like, I'm very familiar with that, yeah.
Yeah, it is not cheap.
Mhm.
I went to public schools. I don't know how I ended up at least decently intelligent, but I can kinda read, so
As long as you can read and write, we're cool.
yeah,
We
it's like
can
I
talk.
can kinda read. Um, but as an idea, a couple of professions to consider because construction management can get there, it's just highly unlikely.
Mhm.
Also, you need to consider student loan debt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you have the men who graduate and they have their degrees, and that's actually getting harder to find, unfortunately, because less
Mhm.
men are actually attending post-secondary schools. Having that degree does typically come with a receipt, and that receipt is gonna be due. No one's gonna be giving us any kind of forgiveness in that regard. Something that's gonna have to be paid, which will
Yeah.
affect the debt to income ratio, which will affect the ability to purchase a second or first home, which and also the neighborhood that it's in. So,
Mhm.
definitely keep that in mind. Personally, for me, just based on this person and their profile from what was presented, I think it would be difficult to
Mhm.
achieve the lifestyle that you have set for yourself and want,
Mhm.
and also have this person as a partner. Um, I've noticed that a lot of times someone figures they can take that partner and maybe push them to get over that edge, to kinda get over that hump, and in some cases that works. Here, just be and this is me making assumptions, this is
Yeah, yeah,
based
yeah.
on,
This is
like
all theory for this one,
correct,
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
theory. It would be difficult to achieve there because that I can see resentment growing on the other side, thinking that, you want too much or you think that you deserve more than you're worth or whatnot, and then
Mhm.
that leads to resentment on the other end.
And this
So
is exactly what I dealt with in my last relationship, so, like, I can attest, yeah,
oh,
I have experience with that.
yeah, and I mean, that's the difference when it comes to, like, starting to date seriously, like, when you're dating not just to have fun and hang out, like, when you're
Mhm.
dating to actually find a partner, yeah, you have to be discerning. You
Mhm.
have to. You
Mhm,
have to
mhm.
be discerning. And, the second one, it's funny because, I don't even know how I set these up this way, but they kind of line up. Uh, this guy, we'll call him V, he,
Mhm.
reminds me a lot of myself
Oh.
when I was younger. Yeah. This is a person that's just not ready. He's not really ready for a serious, like, one-on-one relationship, although I do think that based on his traditional values,
Mhm.
he thinks he is,
Mhm.
but it's gonna end up being somebody stepping out, and it's more than likely gonna be him, and it's because he's not there yet. He's still growing in his own life, he's still trying to put things together. Fidelity is always going to be in question,
Mm.
and completing the degree that he's looking for, it's fairly late. That in itself is gonna add to that student loan debt, and then once complete, this is a guy that physically hasn't had issues with obtaining attention from the opposite gender.
Mhm.
Once you combine that with his income, and that is the possibility to crack that six-figure mark, this is the kind of person that, exercises their options, so to speak. and it's not a bad thing, and,
Mhm.
nothing against him, it's just it's fairly obvious. It's fairly I guaranteed he's if you've spoken with him, he's the most charming, easiest to talk to, and just,
Yeah.
like, man, you could yeah, that's that guy. Like, for sure. He's a good guy, but, not the right guy. But if you're looking to date and have fun,
Mhm.
that would honestly be the most fun and most exciting to date. I will throw that out there.
Okay, okay.
So he's not completely terrible. We have another one, D.
Mhm.
Seems like a really nice guy. Um, Definitely gives you vibes to where he'd be open to a more egalitarian household. So I can definitely see him doing that, not harboring any kind of resentment for that, and then also striving to do as good as he can.
Mhm.
Um, his career choice, it kinda tops out at around $90,000, and that is after, acquiring years of experience so that you can go, to, like, a higher tier, medical facility. Student loan debt because of that industry is gonna be something that is typically substantial, and this would be the person who would be able to get the inside jokes and, like, the colloquialisms culturally.
Mhm.
So that is actually a big plus. The only thing is it's, like, how do I say this without being mean?
Go for it.
It would be more of an average existence,
Mhm.
and and there's nothing wrong with an average existence, like, average is average for a reason, there's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with it. However, if you want more than that, it's going to lead to resentment on your end, to
Yeah.
where you feel like you kind of wasted an opportunity, so to speak.
Mm.
So, but I will say that this does seem like a person who would love to have a family, would work hard, and would set proper examples. But I mean, this is more of a long haul. That would be, maybe the kids start to vacation internationally once they crack 12, 13,
Mhm.
because this is a person that seems like they'd save. They do other side things, like whether it was collecting cans or even something as simple as just like saving metal. They would do what it took to make sure that their family had it,
Mhm.
which also includes accruing debt. So just keep that in mind for like the end of life things, because
Right.
I'm a big person who thinks that when it's time for you to check out, your kids should not have a bill. They should, they should have something to show for it, so to speak.
Right.
So just keep that in mind.
Okay.
And then the very last one is
This
H.
okay.
Yeah.
This one, I'm actually nervous and excited to hear your feedback.
So I I have a couple of questions
Yeah,
for
yeah,
H
yeah.
before I get into like the complete review. Um, the relationship with the child's mother, is that good? Is it
So, to keep him anonymous as much as I can, but we're having this discussion. H is someone I have been seeing. We actually had a date earlier today, so like this is someone I have been seeing
awesome?
continuously. Um, she is at a distance. He has full custody, and interestingly enough, my circumstance with my mom, like at least dynamics and just all that, is somewhat similar to what their situation is. So she's at a distance um, without disclosing too much. She's around. There's definitely been very respectful feedback on her and her part. So that was something I did notice, but at a definitely at a very long distance.
Okay, that is
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
Because having that, because there's always going to be a connection there because of what they share together.
Right, right, right.
So as long as it's at a distance, that's a
Hmm.
safer endeavor.
Hmm.
And just roughly, were they young parents or were they are divorced?
Young,
Okay,
so early 20s.
okay,
Oopsies,
okay.
basically. Yeah.
That makes a little bit more sense.
Mhm.
And then H's background, a two-parent household, single-parent household?
Two parents, still married,
Okay,
um, Christian household. Yeah.
okay, okay,
Mhm.
that's good, okay, that's good.
Mhm.
One thing I will say on the pro for this guy,
Mhm.
definitely seems mature beyond his years, and when I say that, it's the mindset that it takes to do what he does. He leads with his son, so he's not trying to hide that, get a potential partner interested, and then just say, "Oh, by the way." No,
Mhm.
he leads with excuse me, with his child,
Yes.
leads with his child, puts that out there, and I think that's a very strong thing to do.
Mhm.
It does show that he's proud of being a parent, it does show that he's an active parent, and it does actually show that he's a person that will take responsibility and that he's accountable for his actions.
Mhm.
So that is a big plus, like, I'm very big on that. The
Mhm.
one thing I would say is, though, are you ready to be a stepmother?
So this is actually a conversation that I've shared with friends. I would say in terms of like timeline wise, I'm not comfortable meeting said child at the moment because I would want to make sure said per H and I had all the discussions before of like expectations for family, expectation for home, especially because there is a child involved. You need to have those long-term serious
Yes.
conversations, right? So I would say the first steps would be, have we had all of these discussions? Are we on the same page about everything? Yes, okay. And then from there, have I been introduced to the family, child? Are we is she okay with like child, like is like everything okay with that? Um, hoping to do grad school starting next year. That's gonna take me 2 years. And so in terms of like timeline wise for marriage, I would say earliest in 2 years. And so I know that would start early before on like in terms of being a stepmother, but as long as all those steps for beforehand were set and it's a strong foundation, I would say I'm definitely open to having that responsibility or role.
Okay. Now, for H's child, um, does H's child's mother, do they share cultural similarities, so to speak?
So I don't know too much of that context yet because H is full custody parent, so said mother's not really involved in terms of that. But I would imagine to a certain extent in terms of like demographic, ethnicity, and all that, they're somewhat like similar culture.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, here's a tough question, and I know this
Mhm.
was supposed to be much lighter, but this is gonna
No,
be
no,
a
no,
tough
no, no.
question.
No. Bring it on. Bring it on.
Are you ready to potentially accept a child that will not look like you?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
That's never been an issue for me. I've considered myself, like, for whatever reason, if I personally could not have children, adoption has always been something I was very open to. Or financially down the road, if I had my own children, but we had the means to adopt a child that needed a home, absolutely. Um,
Oh, yes. I agree
yeah.
with that. That's actually a route my wife and I are definitely going to take.
Yeah.
It's just it's a lot that comes with it. We've discussed the worries of depending on how old the child is, the amount of
Mhm.
trauma that child's,
Mhm.
experienced, and then worrying about that transference of trauma from that child to ours.
Mhm.
We've taken that into great consideration. So, but in terms of you being open to that, I think that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's
I
amazing.
I've it's interesting because I've talked to friends or granted, even my ex, him and I one of like towards the end of our relationship, we had a conversation about like adoption or stepchildren. And he was a hard stance, like I could never parent another man's kid. And it was like very much rooted in the ego. Like that's not my
Oh,
child. That's not of me. Like I'm not gonna touch that. And those thoughts have never crossed my mind. I think growing up with a single dad and always wanting some type of stepmother figure, I think I just have a lot more understanding for a dynamic like that. And me and H have talked about it where interesting enough, like I'm in a position where I can completely understand where he's coming from and not that like how do I put it? Not that I'm like, oh, I saw your single father. Let me sign up because I have a single father. Not that it was that, but I have a lot of understanding and patience because I get it. And I think with a dynamic like that, you really need to understand. And it's definitely something I'm not taking lightly. Like, I know for sure the child is priority. And if I was ever dating somebody and they did not put their child priority, for me, that's a huge red flag. Absolutely no. Like, your priority
Totally
should be
agree.
your child always. I know I'm going to be secondary until I'm officially part of the family. That's just what it is. And I am so wholeheartedly believe in that because my dad always made my brother and I priority. So I see how that benefited us and how that helped us. So it's an interesting dynamic where I grew up the way I did. He is now having to raise his child the way he's having to raise her. And there's an understanding there.
That's good. I mean, I honestly, out of the choices, he did kind of fit the best,
Mhm.
simply because of the fact of me being aware of your background, and then also him. There's a little bit of familiarity there,
Yeah.
but I think it's because of the good aspects of it,
Mhm.
not just because of the situation.
Right.
And that's why I was like, yeah, I can see there being a connection there. Um, what I will say though is sometimes, especially if you're a nice guy, the saying is nice guys finish last. That could lead to potential boredom. And I'm saying that as a
Mhm.
person who's relatively boring. I'm a very boring guy. Like, my wife's always like, oh, I want to go out here. I want to go out there. We'll go out. But she's usually the one that's like, I want to go here. I'm like, okay, I'll plan it. But I'm not big on going out. I like staying home. Uh, that could be a potential concern to keep in
It's
mind.
So this was actually something I talked to with my dad yesterday or 2 days ago. Where like I wish I had the profiles of the two guys I had matched previously with H to share with you how their dynamics. But there was one in particular where great chemistry. We got along really well, like the physical chemistry and like sexuality and all that. Like it was definitely on there, but when you boil it down to it, compatibility is not it. And and this is something I've learned where chemistry does not equal compatibility. And because of me growing up in survival mode, I get drawn to the chemistry because it's familiar, because you're on edge. You might think the butterflies are completely healthy, but depending where they're coming from, they're not. And so I've had to really process it. Like, you know what? Someone that's healthy for me might quote unquote be boring because I'm not used to what boring is. And so me and H's personalities were very similar. I'm not huge in astrology, but for people wondering, like our birthdays are 4 days apart, so we're the same sign. We're Tauruses. If people are interested, I don't know, but I don't really know how it means. In case people want to know, and so it's been interesting to kind of see someone that's like very mellow like me. Typically, we're both introverts, but I can tell I'm definitely much more the extrovert between us. So coming with that, we're having to be aware if like I want to do outings or like, I love networking. This person is not like that really. But based on so far what I've been told, he's open. And so I think that down the road is where the communication expectations have to be put out. Like, oh, are you going to be supporting me when I have to go to this event? Also, I need to respect your boundaries if you're socially burnt out and need time to recover more than I do. So it's definitely things I'm noticing and learning, but the whole thing of like being bored is definitely something I've noticed because I'm like, oh my god, oh he's constantly like when is he gonna text me? All that. Like some examples from the get go, he's just always checked in. Like, hey, I'm gonna go do this. Sorry, I was doing this. Here's my schedule for the day. I've never had to ask. He's just given it to me, and I'm like, wow, I feel very secure for the first time, where I don't have to question anything. Versus the guy that I dated where with this chemistry, like it's because I didn't know what was going to happen next. So I just wanted to point that out because that's something I've been recognizing and realizing from this other person compared to H, where this is the first time where I've felt totally secure. And we've had discussions, like we met on an app, but I'm not actively seeking anybody out just because of other circumstances. And he's told me he's the type of person where he just focuses one on one, like 1% at a time. And so we both discussed like we're not really on the app anymore, that we would both agree to delete it
That's
and
good.
just kind of see what happens. But anyway, just some context for people listening in case they're interested.
One thing I would suggest is there does need to be a little healthy mix and blend of the chemistry and the good guy.
Mhm.
Um, the one thing H reminds me of like coworkers I've had or
Mhm.
like guys I've been around who were like on a sporting team with me or something. Like really, really genuinely good guys, but typically didn't have the best luck because they almost didn't feel real. They felt like too good, too nice.
Mm.
And so that would run people off. And then on top of that, that chemistry, that warm and fuzzy feeling, um, it's it takes a little bit of work to make sure you can cultivate that.
Right, right, right.
Um, one thing I would suggest, I don't know H, I haven't spoken with H, but I would suggest lots of leg and back exercises, simply because that'll help raise his testosterone a bit, and that'll place him in a little bit more of a dominant fashion. And
Mhm.
some of those dominant traits and genes, they just transition and relate to those warm and fuzzy feelings. Uh, that will help. It'll also help him as well because I can tell. I can't say I can tell. I assume that he's not the most confident guy. Um, typically, the way that he takes pictures,
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
tell there's a bit of apprehension there and a little bit of fear. And I think maybe even, joining a gym or just getting around a group of, high earners, high
Mhm.
achievers, will help him, especially
Mhm.
because he has a very large, hefty goal, that
Mhm.
he wants to accomplish.
Mhm.
However, I can see him as a person that kinda gets halfway and then would potentially settle, because in order to achieve what he's looking to do, it will take the networking, it will I can totally see that he's willing to do the hard work. It's just the uncomfortable stuff that I can see
Yeah.
him not doing and pushing, like the networking for
Mhm.
one, the coming up with different innovative ideas and kind of taking it from there, and I find it interesting that there's, that he looks into, like, the longevity side of things, which is, going to focus heavily, at least for men, on testosterone and keeping your
Mhm.
testosterone levels up.
Mhm.
I think that those will be things that will be good for him.
Yeah.
Keeping those T levels up would be really good for him, and, I guess the only other concern would be is how many kids he would want.
Mhm.
Um, definitely having that conversation with the fact that the children that the 2 of you would potentially have would not look exactly like his current child,
Mhm.
and that would also relate to not necessarily issues, but an existence in which his child will have to be okay with explaining,
Yeah.
because someone's gonna say like, "Oh, how's that your brother? How's that your sister? You guys don't look that anything alike," and he
Yeah.
has to be comfortable with explaining that because that's gonna be a thing, especially, with different skin tones and things along those lines.
Mhm.
I would love to live in a perfect world that doesn't see color,
Right.
but we live in the real world,
Right, right, right.
and that will definitely be a bridge. I personally don't run into it because, like, I kinda slot myself into being American first, but I do understand my wife she's Latina and she's extremely fair-skinned Latina. Like, people that are typically Caucasian can't tell that she's not Caucasian, but everyone else can tell. Like, if you
Yeah.
got some spice, in the bloodline, you can tell, like,
Ye
"Oh, yeah, yeah, you can tell where someone's from." So she will run into that, and, I mean, the 2 of you will. You'll get it every now and then, it's not as, prevalent, I would say, in Latin and white culture. I get it a lot, I'm a black guy, and then, they look at my wife, they assume initially that she's a white lady, and here's a black guy dating a white lady again. It's
Right.
all the giant trope.
Right, right, right.
Uh, I myself, I typically don't care, but I know that it does bother my wife at times. But it's just something you deal with. You'll get
Mhm.
it there too. It'll just be there. He has to also be prepared and ready for that without becoming a savior,
Mm.
especially being a guy, and that's outside of like the race. Just being a guy, if anyone says anything disrespectful, you know, there would be something that would be said on his part, and that's a responsibility that has to be accepted before it gets there, so that it doesn't become something that is more of a regret
Mhm.
or something that you can kind of become grow bitter over. I would say, in regards to your two paths in terms of alignment. I'm also a person who doesn't know a damn thing about astronomy, astrology, or
Astrology.
astrology. I know nothing about it. Like, I can tell you planets, but that's just because I like astrology. Astronomy, rather. I'm blaming it on whiskey.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to consider, but in regards to, like, his mentality, I think those things line up very well. It's
Mhm.
just it would be if you're looking to have a joint income of excess of $200,000 a year so that you can do the things that you have envisioned for your children and yourself, that would mean you more than likely taking on more of the financial load, and that would be something that would have to be accepted beforehand
Yeah.
and understood that it could be a possibility. You know, it's not a guarantee, but it is a potential possibility to keep in mind. And, one thing I would suggest, if and, like, I hate to say this because it's like it's so bad for the guy,
Uh-huh.
but, uh, because the person you would typically be looking for is such a rare commodity, I would suggest keeping options open
Mhm.
without, being rude or, overstepping any boundaries, but I would suggest continuing to consider other potential opportunities, and I wouldn't necessarily place school or education or anything like that ahead of that partner. Um, if you happen to come across that partner, whether it be, you've already met them 10 years from now or tomorrow, I would suggest not necessarily blocking off the 2 years to go to grad school and to do all that.
Mm, mhm.
I wouldn't suggest blocking it off and saying that this is the route that I've gotta go in order to make this work, simply because men and women are attracted to typically different things.
Right.
This is, it's not something that's, like, set in stone, it's just speaking in generalities. Typically, men are attracted to what they see, and a lot of that has to do with, again, going back to that primitive brain, and that's typically longer hair, that's typically going to be clear, clean skin,
Mhm.
healthy fit and in shape, and on top of that, younger,
Mhm.
because guys look at that in terms of generally, guys look at that in terms of, like, the ability to bear children and so on and so forth. So I would suggest keeping that open, for yourself, because that will place you in a position to where, as of right now, God, this is gonna sound so bad. Right now, you are in the prime.
Mhm.
So if we were at a casino, so to
Yeah, yeah.
speak,
Yeah, yeah. I won't be
y
offended, by the way, like, you're fine.
okay, thank you for that.
I won't be offended at all because it's so true, like, I'm literally in my prime. But anyway,
Right.
continue.
You're in that casino, and right now you're holding the majority of the chips.
Mhm.
So, what I would suggest is to not play to see how much more you can get. It would be to find a good hand and cash out. That's
Mhm.
kind of the way I look at it now. Also, your age range is relatively good. I mean, that's finding a person that you can grow with, and by the time they hit their mid-40s, because that's typically, when someone hits their financial stride, then you guys are making the type of income you would want, and you still have an opportunity for childbearing and
Mhm.
things like that available to you. And if not, like you said, adoption is always an option.
Mhm.
And I think people need to keep that in mind. Adoption is an option.
Right, yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
No, I'm loving this just to get feedback, especially from you. You know, that we have a little bit of an age gap, so it's nice to hear an older man's perspective that isn't my dad, or you know what I mean. Definitely like some of the things you've brought up as like concerns, just seem to be aware of, have been things I have definitely been thinking about in terms of me, and we'll just go with H right now because that's who I'm seeing. Um, I appreciate that he's been very vulnerable. You know, our first date, he told me his situation. And so I appreciate the candidness. I appreciate there was just honesty. Um, appreciate like we been starting to like touch more into topics of like long term, like where do we picture ourselves living, career goals, like our expectations. Um, Now, in regards to a little bit of like our past relationships, things were that are like non-negotiables in relationships and all that. Um, so from what I can gather right now, it seems it does very much seem that he's a lot more mature for his age because of course he's had to grow up a lot faster, which even men, like the other men I've dated, the one with the great chemistry but compatibility was not it, was 30, so 4 years older than me. So emotionally unavailable and just not it, you know? So I appreciate that we've both been on the same wavelength in terms of communication, like where we're at, let's cut off the BS and the fluff. Like we're actually trying to work towards our goals. Um, Definitely things I'm not taking lightly in regards to, said child and, family life and like having to maybe jump ahead a few steps in regards to starting families and all that. Um, so no, this has been awesome just to kind of hear feedback and just kind of listen in. Um, but so far, I've gotten no red flags. I think of any man I've dated, he's been far more the most respectful. Definitely, I sense the good vibes where he's very much shy, kind of gets nervous. I know I have to take a little bit of the initiative when it comes to like just us in regards to certain aspects, of course, not all of it. Um, but I think at least for now, things seem to be going well. And so, again, taking it day by day, little by little, like very slowly, as much as I can.
Definitely so. Definitely keep in mind that, let's say, best case scenario,
Hmm.
his business venture takes off,
Yeah.
it works out, and he gets into that, and he becomes an earner, that 5 to 1% earner. Has he had much experience with being I guess, a commodity, like sought after, so to speak?
I'm gonna say from what I know, probably not.
Okay, so just make sure, this is, of course, like a very far projection. This is, you guys wedding bells and all that. Um, Make sure that he is, someone who is staunch in his belief
Hmm.
and just somebody that has really high moral compass. He
Hmm.
already seems to have that. It's just I understand that. And again, I hope I'm not offending anyone. I'm just gonna give it to you straight and raw. There's like this idea that guys like these voluptuous women with, BBLs and giant lips and things of that nature.
Yeah.
The reality of the situation is that women like that are used for fun. Those are typically not the women that men of value are going to look at as marriage material or a wife.
Hmm.
And it's evident when we look out in the world in terms of who's married and who's married to these type of men. I'm not referencing like athletes or entertainers because that's kind of like its own odd, extra little subgroup. Just, dentists, doctors, lawyers, professionals, because you have to bring your partner to events and they're going to see your partner, and your partner has to be able to speak eloquently and provide their own worth. That's typically not there when, it's the person that's putting so much emphasis on how they look. They it becomes like it becomes like a conquest, or it just becomes like an object.
Hmm.
And if a person's not used to that attention, that could, open the door to them wanting to necessarily stray. I don't necessarily see that with him. There's just the entire makeup. He seems to have at least enough confidence to where he's confident in himself and his
Hmm.
competency, especially with being a father, which means he's not going to be a 30, 40-year-old virgin. He's someone who's actually had experience. So that does help and go a long way. But I will
Yeah.
say that is a potential to just keep in mind.
Hmm.
One thing for yourself, let's imagine that H didn't exist.
Okay. Hmm.
If H doesn't exist, the partner that you would be looking for in terms of like having the traits and qualities you want, they tend to kind of go hand in hand. So if I say money or if I say, assertiveness, not assertiveness, that's not the right word. I would say, I guess maybe assertiveness, but not in a way to where it's overt or toxic,
Right,
just
right. They just know what they want.
correct.
Decisiveness?
Decisiveness,
Yeah, yeah.
confidence, that.
Yes, yeah.
These things will typically tend to go hand in hand.
Mhm.
Um, Typically, people that make, good money, they typically have better fitness because they have access to better food, and in some cases, they have a little bit more time to exercise because they're not so worried about, not being able to, "Can I eat or can I leave the lights on?" kind of
Mhm.
deal.
Mhm.
They have their own set of traumas and troubles, but it's typically not the, survival-based ones. Um, that typically is gonna be the male that has that mindset that you're looking for. So, if you do decide to, let's say by the time you go to your 3rd to get your 3rd degree, that it's gonna be, I would say, maybe start looking at the pre-med guys, looking at
Yeah,
the guys that are going towards the bar,
yeah.
uh, things of that nature, and it's just because they're gonna embody a lot more of the things that you're looking for. That's unless you're comfortable with either being the one who is the primary earner, or you're comfortable with, not living as a monetarily based lifestyle. And I only say monetarily based because it takes money to move around. So just something to keep in mind there when it comes to like the dating prospects, so to speak.
So, actually, to touch on that, like, if you pay for, like, advance I paid for 1 week, okay, guys, don't judge me, for Hinge, just because I was like, let me just really file down what I'm looking for and see what it gives me. Um, you can put, like, what level of education you're seeking, and so, for me, I've always seen, like, someone that's done secondary, like, anything above the, like, bachelor's or above, is working towards their master's, and a big part of it is because I value education. Like, I'm working towards my master's, and so I want a partner that is on the same page as me. But then also the same thing in terms of, like, the life I picture for myself and the things that I want out of life. I know I need somebody that views that same wavelength. So
And is willing to sacrifice for it because there'll be
mhm.
a lot of people, who see that kind of option and opportunities for themselves. However, they don't necessarily see the work that it comes with it because everybody
Right.
wants to be a millionaire, but there's
They
work
don't
that
put in
that comes with it.
right, right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know myself, that's something that I realized that it's not something I want anymore. When I was younger, I was like, "Oh, man, I need millions because you get to have mansion parties and all this stuff." And for me, now I'm more of a homesteader. I just need to make sure that I make enough money to maintain my lifestyle, my family's lifestyle, and then kinda go from there.
Mhm.
But one thing to keep in mind is things are only gonna get more expensive. So, that may not even necessarily be an option for someone later in life to say, "I wanna be a homesteader." Well, then that
Right.
means you're gonna have to go live in the boondocks because buying a home with, an acre or even like a quarter of an acre, it's going to be next to impossible. I mean, I,
Right.
I personally know a couple of doctors who literally cannot afford a home here in California,
It's
and it's
insane.
insane. It's
Like,
insane.
you picture doctors like, "Oh, they make the money." But, like, to hear that, especially in California, yeah,
Yeah,
it's insane.
yeah. It's like by the time they're in their 40s, of course, then they can build up some capital. They now demand a higher salary. But even as doctors, now they're only making, they're making below 6 figures or they're making a little over 6 figures, but their student loan debt. So, whew, man, yeah, it's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just keep in mind there's that right pocket, left pocket. And if you're gonna go after, or not even go after, or if you understand that to get what you want, it's gonna fit within a certain echelon of, career or whatnot, focus a little less on the education level
Mhm.
because that typically does come with its own issues.
That's
There
true.
was there was a program that USC did. I want to say it was like 9 years ago, I think, where it was about $120,000 to get a social work degree, but it
Oh,
said USC on it.
I have I know somebody, she's a social worker, got her master's in social work at USC, paid like
Yeah.
100K for her degree, and she's in so much debt, and she's barely was like making 60K.
Yes. And
Yeah,
that's typical of that profession. So keep in mind that our education system is a business,
that's
and
true.
instead of like, it makes sense that, becoming a doctor or a lawyer is expensive. However, you're paid accordingly. And a
Mhm.
lot of these other positions, these are people going and graduating with massive amounts of debt, and then they get out and they get, into a career that's never going to put them in a position to pay it off.
Yeah.
And then now that's another, boulder hanging over the head, so to speak. So that is just one thing to keep in mind. A lot of blue collar guys are typically forgotten. Plumbers, electricians, engineers. Those are great positions. Guys that fall within that, those categories are typically traditional. Having a STEM mindset,
Mhm.
they typically, embody those traditional traits, and they typically have like a moral compass versus, just letting their divining rod kind of lead them with whatever they're going to get into next. So those are things to consider.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's relationships and dating it's scary nowadays. So
It is, and I'm like, "All right." That's why with my current circumstance that, like, I've mentioned with you before, I realized, like, I'm not gonna actively look right now and just kind of focus on other priorities, and so, me and H, we're just gonna no expectations, see what happens, and if that doesn't work out, I'm just gonna take a break and just let's hopefully something organically happens, I guess.
yeah, and then also just place yourself in positions that are going to be advantageous for you. I know as a guy when I was younger, it was if you see a group of women, it was usually a big, oh no, you can't go talk to a group of women. For me, I found it the easiest because they're in a group. Their guards typically going to be down because they feel safe. They have numbers.
Mhm.
It made it easier to talk and have conversation. With that being said, if there's a place that has a certain line of people that go there and hang out. So if
Yeah.
it's a cocktail bar, a restaurant, I'd recommend having lunch there from time to time on your own, um, going into places like that, and just doing things solo for a time to time because that will lead to a higher likelihood of one of these higher earning males to actually
Mhm.
approach you. And I mean, your persona, it's very feminine, so you don't have to work on anything with that. You present as a person who's not gonna curse anyone out or, tell them they're idiots for trying to come hit on you.
Yeah.
So I don't think you'll have that as an issue. And I mean, you're not an unattractive person. And because you're not an unattractive person, that does make things easier. It's just it's just the way life is,
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately. But that will also bring charlatans. So just have your BS radar on. And in reality, I mean, I could see a person like H leading you to happiness.
Mhm.
And I can see a person like H with the right, support can go into that business venture that he wants, especially if those are strengths that you hold. You
Mhm.
can handle the networking, maybe even the organization. Men are typically not as organized as women.
Yeah.
And those are things that can actually benefit the two of you. And then you also have the things that you want in your own life. He seems like a person that would support it.
That's the vibe I get as well.
Yeah.
He's actually listened to a few episodes of the podcast.
Oh,
This is like
cool.
right off the get go when we met, and I was like, wow, okay. Like anytime I've mentioned with anybody else, it's like, let's avoid that subject completely on their part. They're like, let's not even touch on that. So with him, he's been so far been bulkily supportive and on the same page when it comes to like both of our what's the word, our ideas on behavioral and physical health on his end and like the preventive side. So, but anyway, before I get on tangent, it seems very much, yeah, he seems like a supportive person.
And I mean, honestly, knowing that, hearing that he actually listened to the podcast, I myself would imagine that everyone did because why wouldn't you? I
Yeah.
mean, you're
And
supposed to be mining information, and if you have a podcast, that's literally free information.
the thing is, I think from what I've gathered, because it is on mental health, a lot of men especially are very emotionally unavailable or
Yes.
very anti mental health, seeking a therapist that's too vulnerable. They don't even want to go there.
Yeah, that's gonna typically not be the type of person you would wanna associate with anyway, so it's
Right.
actually a really convenient, like, sifting method.
Yes, like, I've literally said, like, "Oh, it's been really convenient to just sift through all the no's and the yes." Tell somebody I have a podcast, put out there. If I stop hearing messages from them, I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." Unmatch, 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 unmatch.
Yeah, I mean, that tells you what someone's out there for. I mean,
Mhm.
the fact that H that's actually a really cool thing to hear. The fact that H actually went and listened to a couple of episodes, it shows that he's thinking in terms of the future. Anyone that wouldn't even take the time to skim through it, they're looking for a hookup. Like,
Right.
that's obvious because,
Yeah.
they
They're not
want the
invested.
easiest, lowest hanging fruit, you know?
Yes.
So I could totally see that. That's why I do get, like, the really good guy
Mhm.
from H. He does strike me as just a good, decent person, like, and as his, friend group, all of that. He just seems to be a very inclusive person. So I would, out of the 4, yes, that would be the closest. It's just
Nice.
yeah, so that and, I mean, it happens to be the one that you're talking to, so, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that that adds up to
Perfect.
something. Yeah, I do think that that adds up to something. I would just consider exploring exploring what he wants
Mhm.
and if he understands what it would take to actually achieve those things.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also just, if you have, like, some preferences that you enjoy and that you like, let him know about those preferences and see if he takes the initiative to begin incorporating those things in his lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it does already sound like, he's someone that's health conscious both mentally and physically,
Mhm.
so that is a good thing. That's actually a very good thing.
No, yeah, like, so far of anyone I've met online, he's the only one that's actually been actively at the working out and all of that. He was an athlete. So, like, on the physical side, I'm like, "Okay, I like that very much so." Like, because the gym and me exercising is a big priority of myself, so for somebody that's gonna be respectful of that and on the same page, like
Correct.
and,
It's kinda
he's
hard.
doing his mental health routine and everything that he does, so I'm like, "Okay," like, I've yet to date another guy that's been open about that or is actively working on that. So I'd very much appreciate it as well.
Yeah, and I would say that that probably has to do with the fact that he has a child, and he
Mhm.
understands that he needs to become a better version of himself in order to efficiently and effectively raise that child. It's actually a really good thing, that he does incorporate the aspects of mental health, simply because of the fact it makes him a little bit more of a more well-rounded person.
Yeah.
It's really easy to, and I say that, with quotation marks, it's really easy to be a go-getter, hyper masculine, so what is it? Not beta, alpha
Alpha,
type
yeah.
personality that goes out there and makes all the money in the world, but doesn't realize why in the back of their mind they're breaking down and just slowly fading into obscurity. That happens because that lack of mental health and that lack of focus. Um, there was actually a relatively short debate I got into with someone on Reddit in regards to the importance of mental health and only a couple of only anger being the only necessary emotion that actually can be transferred into something. And they asked me, well, what's an emotion outside of anger that you can actually use to do something? And with hearing that, it's quite obvious that this is a person who they lack confidence and they lack,
Mhm.
just that idea of who they are. Because the reality of it is fear, and I use the one that I knew he would, pick as the worst in the world. I said fear. It's like for myself, I fear being 70, 80 years old and not being able to walk and move around of my own volition. So I make sure that I maintain a proper diet and I exercise.
Mhm.
That's taking fear and using it as a tool, and those are things. Well, anger, if you're in a fight, it's like, bro, we're in the 22nd. Oh God, I'm old. We're past Duck Dodgers. We're past the 24th and a half century.
Yeah.
We're at a point right now to where the majority of altercations are not going to have to be physical, especially if you live in a decent area. And as long as you're capable and you look capable and you're aware of what's going on, you're typically not going to have physical harm brought to you,
Mhm.
unless you're involved in that type of lifestyle.
Right.
But it's important, and mental health it's not focused on in the male community.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's kind of ostracized in a way. Like
It
a person
is.
like H is that honestly makes him rare. Someone who actively does that, that that does make him, a part of that, 10%, 5%.
And I think it's stuff like that that draws me towards that because especially for me being such a mental health advocate that wants to have a profession career in behavioral health on some spectrum, I need somebody that understands that space, is actively working on themselves because I'm actively working on myself, and that way we have the tools to work together. So someone that's being closed-minded, saying like, that's lame, that's more of a girl saying like, I'm a man, I don't need to do that, doesn't flat out just not compatible, which is fine if you're like that, like that's up to you, but just not be compatible with me.
Yeah, that eventually becomes a powder keg.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason why, men who are in professions that involve great, levels of violence, uh, typically blow up. You can see that in law enforcement. You can see that in, the service of the military. If you're not open and you don't talk about these traumatic experiences, that goes somewhere. I
Mhm.
mean, even
Mhm.
if you lock it down and you bury it deep, there's still a bottom, and that bottom eventually fills up and gets to the top. So I mean, it's out there, and if somebody is out there actively working on their own mental health, that will place them in a position to better handle the chasms that life gives us,
Yeah.
because it's not always up. And a partner like that, I mean, somebody who how early did H actually look into your podcast?
Like, I'm pretty sure it was even before our first date. So we had talked for maybe almost a week and then had our first date. And I would say either before, like right after our first date, is when he had told me, "Hey, I've listened to your episodes."
Yeah, that's someone that's considerate.
Hmm.
That's someone that's considerate. But I will say, he's got to be a nice guy with a little bit of edge. There has to be a little bit of edge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned that he played sports, so I know it's there. Like, I know it's there. He's
We
just
were
gotta,
talking about me riding on his motorcycle. So
okay.
maybe that's some edge. Would you consider that some edge?
I mean, if you ride a motorcycle, that shows that, you're willing to take risk.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that does show that he's open to risk. And I mean, girls like motorcycles. It just yeah, it
We
works.
do. We do. We do.
Yeah, there's something a little thrilling about it. So, like, I will say that, that's a good thing.
Hmm.
And then also just, whatever I guess more for you when because he'll ask.
Hmm.
A person like this seems like they'll ask, like, "Well, what are things that you like? What are things you're attracted to?" I would say don't dull it or mute it down. Kinda be straightforward with them. That way, it doesn't end up becoming something later if this goes, the long run. It
Yeah.
doesn't end up being like, "Oh, I'm a little bored," or, "Oh, man, the pool guy, he's really nice." Like, that way it kinda keeps you focused on, your partner.
I think probably our next date is coming up in like 2 days. And we were towards the end of this day, we were starting to talk more about serious stuff. So I feel like this next date will touch more on like relationships and our expectations, what we want. And I've definitely gone to a place where I'm a lot more vocal of what I'm looking for. And one of the things I definitely wanted to share with him was, I want someone that is having intention. Like you don't need to plan every single date out all the time. I get that, but like at least be intentional. As long as I know you're making effort, then I'm okay with that because I've been with relationships with a guy where there was no effort and I did everything, and that's just not how it works. At least for me, that's not what I want. So I know I can definitely get in a place where I can tell him like, hey, these are my expectations. This is what I'm looking for. And if you meet them, fantastic. If you don't, that's fine. But then this is not going to work out. So those are definitely things. And thank you for reinforcing that. We're like within the next few dates, definitely talking more like, okay, this is going to be our sixth date. So let's start talking more about like serious, substantial stuff. And, if we want to be official in a relationship, like what does that look like? What are we looking for? So, but yeah, that's kind of how it's going.
Yeah, and those are scary questions. Those
Hmm.
are going to be very scary questions, especially because I can see that there's a part of you that's like, I want this person to be who he presents as
Yeah,
because you like him, and
I
that's good.
do.
That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good thing.
Hmm.
You know, so you don't necessarily have, and this is where I will say, you don't necessarily have all those butterflies in your belly, but the fact that this is a person that you've been able to connect with and like logically like them and
Hmm.
understand that there are very good traits that they embody, that's something that lasts a lot longer than those butterflies because regardless of
Yes.
how, hot, sexy, whatever that person is, butterflies get old and go away.
Right.
Yes,
Right. Yeah. And again, that goes back to the chemistry is not compatibility. Yes, you need both, 100%. But if you're focusing, oh, we have such great chemistry, this and that, like, I have girlfriends that are on the apps and dating. And they talk about like, oh, this guy has riz, like he has game, he has fashion, blah blah blah. He knows how to talk to me. He like bought me all these flowers and paid for an expensive dinner. Cool, but do you know who this person is? No. I like my priorities are a little different. Like, I don't care. You don't need to wow me with like a fancy dinner bill or, like have a nice car, like dressed a certain way. I don't really care about that because long term, I want to know like, who are you as a person? Are you a partner material or are you just fun material? And, the guy that I dated before, where he was fun chemistry, on the third date, I asked him like, "Okay, what are you looking for?" Because I had learned he had left a 6-year relationship 2 months before him and I started dating, which is literally emotionally unavailable and like plastered on a neon sign that screams that. So I asked him, "Okay, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a rebound or are you open to something more?" And I told him because I want to take things slow, but I'm not here just to like mess around. And eventually, that just didn't work out. But I realized like there are scary questions, but you're gonna think yourself so much more if you have them up front before you get strung along and all these you create this fantasy of what this person can be. And like, yeah, I'll admit, like I've thought about age long term because there is a child involved, and like I need to think long term. Can I picture myself in this world? But that's where now I need to have these conversations before these thoughts become more than what they actually are?
I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly. That honestly, oh God, your friends, I feel so bad for them. Like, I do.
And this is man, this could be a whole nother podcast topic, but this goes into the whole thing of like I think girls are just sold this Disney fantasy of you meet the prince in shining armor and then the next day you're married. And like I see my girlfriends that just like jump ship, like and it's just they're officially in a relationship after like who knows how many dates, not that very long, and but then they get disappointed after and it's really unfortunate. And I think I've learned like you just really need to learn who this person is because everyone's on their best behavior at the beginning. That's
Of
easy.
course.
So but how are they are long term? Like my last relationship, me and this friend were best friends for 7 years. I didn't know who he was until we were dating, and I realized this is not who I thought this person was. So like
Oh,
it's crazy. So it's just like society puts these expectations of how romance is supposed to be, the chemistry, the big grand gestures, the butterflies. I'm like, but that's not substantial, really. It's not. It's fine, but is it long term material? Probably not.
no, it's typically fun while it lasts.
Yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like you mentioned, society does create this Prince Charming idea to where and this kinda goes back to, like, that passport bros thing I was mentioning before.
Mhm.
You have the people who get really good grades and the people who are failing or just barely passing available. And the people that get really good grades, just like when they're picking a school, they have a wide variety of options to pick what school they go to.
Mhm.
And typically, those schools are going to also be pursuing them because they want them to attend their school. That translates into the sexual marketplace.
Mhm.
If you have a guy that has got all that riz, that's funny. You young folks with your slang. But
I learned this recently too, and I was like, "Oh, Riz is the new thing. Okay, I need to start saying that now."
yeah, I have to pick it up because I still say game,
Yeah,
but
ga
yeah, that's what I know it as. A guy got game, like
for
a guy
people that
that
don't
has
know,
game,
yeah, Riz is game, okay.
and
Anyways,
game is Riz.
game is Riz.
Any guy that's got that, especially, like, in high levels to where they get you those butterflies and it's, like, really good first impression, fancy car, all the things that typically, that expensive dinner, you gotta think, if this person's doing this for you and you guys have no real connection, you haven't had a meaningful conversation, this is date number 1, and they're taking you to some fancy place, there is an end game, a goal in mind. Typical first dates of coffee or ice cream or what's coffee? Is that your jam?
No, 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 okay, so this is actually a conversation I've had with girlfriends and my dad, where I know some girls are like, they don't accept coffee dates. Their minimum is a full dinner because the expectation is these men need to drop money on them. I grew up with coffee dates are totally acceptable because you're actually just talking and getting to know somebody. And, having my father and like male perspectives, it's guys know girls are out there to get free dinners. And, like if you don't know who this person is, especially like in our day and age where money isn't just like flying everywhere, you might not want to drop over 100 something on a dinner when you're not sure. So, coffee's a great way to just get to talk to somebody. I have girlfriends that completely disagree, which is fine. Everyone's entitled to an opinion. I know it's also a cultural thing. But once you brought up coffee, I'm like, oh, okay, like it it's interesting what expectations are and like what we're looking for. Like what's the priority?
I think expectations is a good way to put it. I mean, ultimately, from the 2 different sides, it's what is looking to be gained.
Mhm.
Um, for a guy, typically, they're looking to gain sex.
Mhm.
And if a guy is investing, 1, 2, 3, 4, $500 on a date, especially a first date, they're typically expecting something out of that, and then that creates this awkward, way of, "Oh, we're gonna go home." It's like, "Well, are you coming to my house or am I going to yours?" And then now this guy that might have had a great date becomes this weird creep.
Yeah.
And now this guy looks at the girl as a gold digger just trying to get money and a free meal out of him. And then you have that red pill, blue pill, like kind of battle going on again. And those hurt guys then become guys that hurt girls. And
Mhm.
it's this weird cyclical effect. For myself, when I was younger, you know, and this is bad. I'm not even going to say this like with pride, but I used to always look at it because I was really into rap at that time. So I was like, okay, yeah, you don't spend money on these girls. Another word instead of girls. You don't
Mhm.
spend money on these garden tools. You do what you can. My date, my go to was the observatory. The
Ah!
Griffith Park Observatory was my go to date.
Mhm.
A lot of women haven't been there, and then when you take them there and then you actually know things about what is there, because it's kinda like a script, it's
Yeah.
like I've seen all these exhibits, multiple times, so I can talk to you like I know about it, then look at the stars, and it's a wrap.
Right,
Good
right.
first date. Equivalent that to coffee, and if a guy is willing to just go out there and drop a bunch of money on you the first date, that's typically a red flag. Either
I
they're
can
overcompensating or they're just trying to get sex.
or just love bombing.
Yes, another red
Yeah.
flag.
Another red flag. I've been on the receiving end of that this year actually, and no. Some girls think, "Oh my god, he cares so much. He's like giving me princess treatment." Is it for you or is it for him? That's the part where, like, girls don't understand. And obviously
Yeah.
this isn't limited to girls, but, like, majority.
Yeah, because typically in society, it's the man who actively pursues. So yeah, I would agree. Love bombing's typically a red flag. It usually has to do with the person love bombing, especially early on, is that they're missing something. They're
Mhm.
missing, confidence. They're missing, you
It's the
know,
insecurity.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's
They need to
definitely
latch
it.
on, so they give you these grand gestures and hope that you're just so rused and riled that you see how good of a person they are.
Correct.
Mhm.
And then, once that runs out, inadvertently, this person has now been used. And the person that has been used becomes that red pill guy who's screaming that they hate all women. And then those guys become the pickup artist who
Mhm.
then use that money to finagle women into sex, and now women are saying, "All these men ain't shit." And
Yeah.
it's just like there's this weird just cycle of hurt from both sides doing it back and forth to each other, and then you get the, "Well, who hurt you?" question and
Mhm.
things of those line, and it just kind of plays out that way. But one thing I do think is that our society is more of people like you, people who are not looking to take advantage of someone else, just regular, normal ass people. And I think the more interactions that uh, uh, the two genders we're discussing, because I don't
Right,
want to
right,
step
right,
on
right.
anybody's toes,
Yeah.
like I'm not educated enough to tread those waters. So I'm going to say the two genders we're discussing, the more conversation, the more interaction, the better. Especially for men. Men need to get over the fear of approaching and talking to women because that's just the way things are.
Mhm.
And if you don't approach and talk, unless you're, some super Chad, you're typically not going to have much luck.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We crossed the 2-hour threshold.
Yeah.
Um, I want to say that this was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate the fact that you're open, and a lot of the information that we discussed today can definitely be taken and reacted to negatively. Like I've seen similar conversations like this occur between men and women, and it typically ends up becoming contentious. I really appreciate the fact that you had a very open mind, and we were able to just discuss it, without being too emotionally involved in the matter, despite the fact that it's literally about you. So, yeah,
No, it's a discussion. Everyone's entitled to opinion, and I think just listening to another person's perspective, just being open-minded and not feeling personally attacked, like, it's nothing personal. And you don't at the end of the day, you don't have to accept it if you don't want to, but at least just hear the other person out. At least that's how I try to have my mindset when I'm having conversations, but no, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Like, again, I would love to do more of these episodes. They're so much fun.
oh, of course. I'll trust me. I'll have you on often. One thing
Please.
I'll do is when we log off, hang on for a second
Mhm.
because I did want to actually pitch a potential guest for you.
Oh, okay.
So, I
Yay.
wanna say thank you again, Zaira, for
Mhm.
allowing this conversation to take place. Thank you everyone out there, if any at all, for watching and listening to a couple of interesting folks having an interesting conversation. Civil rhetoric, we're about uncomfortable conversations and at least finding common ground, and in some cases, we can even agree. Thank
Yes.
you all again. Have a wonderful evening. Zaira, before we get out of here, is there anything that you wanna promote, talk about going on in your life right now?
Yeah, well, I'll plug myself. So if you want to listen to my podcast, it's Complex like all platforms. Find me on TikTok at Complex. Want to follow my personal one? It's Zarmenda, Zarmenda. I also have a website, Complex Like Wine. Um, I have lots of different topics on there. If any of you want to be also a guest, I'm always open for guests to come on, and you can book me directly on my website. And just be a good person, help somebody out, have the difficult conversations, and you're gonna be okay.
I would agree. And for everyone interested into finding out more about Zara, by the time that this is released, all of our information is going to be in the description of this video. So, Zara, again, thank you so much. Everyone out there, enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you.